Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm going to be commentating over a pre-recorded match that I played against Brian Ruptash, co-host of the First Planet podcast, which we played for our first round of the 4th season of Sam Mann's Warhammer 40k Conquest Octagon WoW Online Competitive League. Though at this point in my LCG career, I've created a tremendous number of videos and interviewed what feels like innumerable tournament champions, my personal estimated total number of matches played is probably still somewhere around 15. So, while I frequently talk to experts and feel like I have rather strong personal potential, I'm still missing an understanding of a great many basic and fundamental elements of gameplay that would still stand to make me a much more competent player. So, I definitely make a few mistakes and suboptimal plays during this video, and for that reason in particular, I ask that you please leave comments constructively criticizing and making suggestions for how I could improve, because with your assistance, hopefully someday I can indeed reach the level of skill and experience required to become a truly formidable tournament player. So, if you enjoyed this video and would like to see me play out and commentate more matches of my own, be sure to let me know in a comment. But in any case, let's get our video started with a match between myself as Ragnar Blackmane and Brian Ruptash as Commander Shadowsun. Alright, well, let's start things off by taking a look at our planet layout. Our first planet is Ossus 4, which steals resources. Second is Iridial, which removes damage. Yvarn puts units into play. Aatrox, which deals damage. And of course, Theron, which routes non-warlord units. My opponent for this match is going to be Brian Ruptash of the First Planet podcast, and I myself am employing Ragnar Blackmane. This is one of the first few games of Ragnar I've played, but he's strong, he's competitive, and I was hoping his statistical performance in tournaments will make up for some of my inexperience when it comes to actually playing. The first play of the game, the initiative token rests in Brian's hand. He deploys an Earthcast Technician to Planet 5. That one command icon is potentially going to let him reel in 2 resources, and he uses its ability to fetch a recon drone. Neither player has opted to use a mulligan at this point, and you can see my starting hand has got a diverse array of command-savvy options. I put an Iron Guard Recruits at Planet 5, which is going to allow me to surpass his single command icon, and I'm taking another look at our planet layout. He puts a Viorla Marksman, a one-ranged attacker, at the first planet, which is going to allow him a considerable threatening presence, since Commander Shadowsun can put attachments for free into play, attached to the marksman, attached to really anything he'd like, and that range is pretty daunting indeed. The earliest any player could win this game is going to be our third planet. Taking a look at the icons, we could have a strong point victory if that were the case. I put a Blackmane Sentinel on Planet 4, Aatrox Prime, just so that I can win command, and of course, depending on where I send my Warlord, have a nice threat range there, since that can relocate itself. He puts a Vashia Trailblazer opposite my Blackmane Sentinel, which allows him to beat me in command, and that allows him the possibility of reeling in 1 card and 1 resource. At this point, I've just got 3 resources, 5 cards left. He's got 3 resources, 5 cards left. I opt to put a Rattling Deadeye at planet 3, just so I can try to pull in that additional resource. At the present moment, I think this game really does a good example of illustrating the fact that I'm very much an intermediate player, so I kind of have a lot of tournament champion understanding just from having done so many interviews, but I lack a lot of the experience required to actually take me from some of those basic fundamentals to being a truly masterful player. I ultimately make a few significant mistakes or less than ideal plays in this video, but I still think that all of the decisions I made were thoughtful, which I believe is very important. We see a recon drone sent to planet 5 by Brian, so that allows him to trump my Iron Guard recruits, and he's nicely within the threat range of Aatrox Prime, were I to win a battle there. I put a Rogue Trader on planet number 2, and that's potentially going to allow me to win 1 card and 1 resource there. At the present moment, we're running out of resources quickly. It's his deploy turn. He's still got 3 resources. I've only got 1 left. There's nothing really desirable in my hand to play out at this point. If I can manage to send Ragnar to the same location as his warlord, I have a Primal Howl ready and waiting, and he actually opts to outright play a copy of Shadowsun Stealth Cadre attached to his Viorla Marksman, so he's not waiting until committance or something like that, so that kind of tips me off that his warlord is maybe unlikely to be sent to the first planet just because he's got such a formidable attacker there, that 3-4 ranged unit. At the moment, we're deciding which planets to send our units to, and I believe I ultimately opt for planet 1. At the present moment, it's kind of up in the air where Brian's going to send his warlord. He ultimately decides on planet 2 just to prevent me from getting 1 resource and 1 card. I was interested in trying to kill off his marksman just before it gets gun drones or something even nastier than it already is. And again, Commander Shadowsun doesn't actually get the ability to trigger its effect, and I relocate my Blackmane Sentinel to the first planet to try to ensure that I can kill off that ranged unit. I'm ultimately going to win a fair bit of command. Brian does as well. I pull in a total of 3 resources, which means I'll have plenty to fund the surprises I've got in my hand, but Brian fares much better with 2 cards and 3 resources. We're going to be fighting battles at the first and second planet exclusively, and I'm really going to try to kill off this marksman without taking hopefully too much damage in return. There's nothing I can do against Shadowsun at planet 2, and hopefully I can just try to make sure that this command lead Brian has doesn't become permanent. I do have initiative at the first planet, but I make a small mistake forgetting that he has a ranged attacker, so he attacks my Blackmane Sentinel with a value of 3, and I believe I'm ultimately going to invest 1 resource in playing an Indomitable. And it looks like I accidentally paid for that twice. I ticked down my resources and played it out. Hopefully that's not going to end up making an influence on the rest of the game. And since I survived that attack, I take a swing at his Viorla Marksman. He's got 4 cards in hand after using a heavy marker drone for 2 shields. I attack with Ragnar, and he spends another shield card. So at this point, I'm 2 cards in hand. He's 3 cards in hand. I keep attacking as neither of us retreats, and I'm really trying to either deplete his hand of as many shield cards as I can, and ideally ultimately kill off this ranged unit before it becomes a big, daunting threat. So Brian at the moment is trying to decide, does he want to shield or not? It's kind of up in the air for him. Ultimately, he does take 2 points of damage, and now it's going to be his combat turn. He goes and exhausts his units. I assume he's going to be taking a swing at my Blackmane Sentinel. I ultimately allow it to die, saving that Primal Howl to hopefully draw me up some cards, because at the moment, even though it was an error, I'm down to 2 resources and 2 cards relative to Brian's 4 and 3. He ultimately does choose to play an event, and this kind of highlights one of my weaknesses as a player. Tense Negotiations allows him to exhaust his Warlord to trigger the battle ability of the planet he is at, and of course, since he's sitting at Iridial, he clears both points of damage from his Marksman, and that definitely set me up in a less than favorable position, but I decide to press my luck, take a swing with Ragnar, and put another couple points of damage on that Marksman, just because at the present moment he's down to 2 cards in hand, and I think it's all the less likely he's got shields. So at this point he uses up that event, he does ultimately decide to retreat, so maybe it wasn't that bad after all that I kind of had the gall to really push that. I end up capturing the first planet, I gain 1 strong point icon, and of course I steal 1 resource from my enemy. My rogue trader is relatively free from being obliterated by Commander Shadowsun, since Shadowsun is not ready to attack, and I'm therefore given the opportunity to retreat. Commander Shadowsun does happen to win his combat at that planet, and once again clear off that 2 points of damage from the Marksman, but at least I was able to clear out that event. At the present moment, there are no more combats to take place, and we're ultimately going to proceed into the headquarters phase. I mentioned one of my weaknesses is just kind of a lack of experience playing the game, but also playing against the Tau in particular, just because some of the events that Brian ends up playing do kind of take me by surprise. We start our new deploy phase. The initiative is now in my hand. I draw a Tactical Squad Cardenas and Void Pirates. I have 7 resources, 4 cards. Brian has 6 resources, 4 cards. I've got a Rogue Trader sitting in my HQ. He's got his 3/4 VR Law Marksman sitting in his HQ. Currently, it's looking like Brian is going to be winning 2 command struggles relative to my 1. Our new 5th planet is now Taurus, where if a player controls fewer units, they can pick their choice of 3 cards or 3 resources, and at the present moment, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. Just because I've played so few games, it's a little bit of a struggle for me to try to figure out where I want to try and set up my tactical squad. I deploy a Void Pirate to 5th planet, and Brian puts a Daring Assault Squad at the 1st, which is immediately a tremendous problem. The deck I'm running has a large number of relatively low hit point units that are strong in the command phase, so having Area Effect 2 or more is going to start posing a tremendous problem. So the earlier I can kill off that unit, the better. So if that Daring Assault Squad ends up a 5/5 thanks to a Shadowsun Stealth Cadre, or ends up with Area Effect 4, all of those things are going to pose an enormous bit of trouble for me. At the moment, that Aatrox Prime is looking very favorable as a Warlord committance, just so that I can try to pick off that Recon Drone and or his Earthcast Technician, potentially scare his Vashia Trailblazer away from Aatrox Prime, but at the moment, I feel like I'm at a bit of a loss for what to do. It seems like I'm up against a hell of a lot of very daunting opposition at this point. I ultimately decide to play that copy of Tactical Squad. I change my mind regarding the copy of the Tactical Squad. And at this point, I believe I've simply opted to pass. We see a copy of the Gun Drones, one of my greatest fears, come into play from my opponent, played directly from his hand, so that Daring Assault Squad now is sitting at Area Effect 4. At this point, the earliest that Brian could win the game is in 4 more turns at Planet 4. We see a Command Link Drone hit Commander Shadowsun, which boosts up her attack value to 2. And at the present moment, Brian is completely out of resources. He's sitting at only 1 card in hand relative to my 6 resources and 3 cards, but it's still looking like he's got a fair bit of a command lead on me. I do ultimately decide to commit to Aatrox Prime just because that Daring Assault squad is absolutely terrifying, and Brian sends his Warlord to planet number 2 so that he can try to pick off my Deadeye, and in any case set himself up favorably for the following turn's command, and potentially kill off my Deadeye without really any trouble at all. It's looking like a significant command phase victory for Brian. I do end up pulling in 3 cards and 2 resources. Brian reminds me that I forgot to snag an extra resource from my rogue traders, so I do that presently. Brian himself gets 1 card and 3 resources, which means he's still only got 2 cards in hand and a total of 3 resources. His deck, he disclosed after the match, focuses fairly heavily on expensive units, and as combat phase begins, we see that he uses his mobile Vashia Trailblazer to shift away from Aatrox Prime, which in hindsight was probably a mistake on his part, seeing as how Ragnar is going to be winning that battle entirely uncontested. And speaking of uncontested battles, his Daring Assault squad sitting at planet number 1 is ultimately going to capture Iridial, and thankfully he does not have any damaged units to pull damage from. During the command phase, I ended up pulling another Blackmane Sentinel and Promotion, which is going to help my mobility during the command phase. Ultimately, during combat, since I've got the initiative token, I deploy an Eager Recruit, and since he's only got 2 cards in hand, I try to press my luck and deal out as much damage as I can with this Eager Recruit. And this is yet another mistake that we see on my part. I was counting on this Indomitable in hand to negate area effect damage, but a very simple, silly oversight on my part. Area effect, of course, does not count as an attack. So if Brian would have made a mistake and outright attacked me, then I could have in all likelihood killed off his Daring Assault squad. So this is kind of another great hallmark of a beginning to intermediate player where my heart and my brain were in the right place, but due to my inexperience, I ultimately end up wasting my Eager Recruit, and of course, Iridial clears that 2 points of damage off of his Daring Assault squad, so that Eager Recruit would have been much better saved for later on in the game, for sure. We're also going to be seeing a battle conducted at planet number 2, owing to Commander Shadowsun sitting right there. My Rattling Deadeye does have ranged, so it will be able to get off a ping of 1, and I'm going to go ahead and target his marksman just to try to soften up that target really as best I can to make sure that it doesn't become just some enormously daunting, deadly powerhouse, seeing as how it's already arranged 3-4 units. Commander Shadowsun takes a swing at my Rattling Deadeye, and instead of playing Primal Howl or Indomitable, I decide to save those effects and simply let it enter my discard pile. Commander Shadowsun kills it very conveniently indeed. And that battle at Yavvarn, Brian does not trigger that ability. I do have Ragnar sitting unopposed at planet number now 2, currently 3, which is Aatrox Prime, and I am able to trigger that battle ability in order to target Farron, so I'm going to hopefully score 3 total kills, unless Brian ends up spending some shield cards. So his Vashia Trailblazer, his Earthcast Technician, and his Recon Drone. So even though my mistakes in this video are perhaps more egregious, it looks like Brian's not without making his own. But again, I very much appreciate him letting me post this video and record it in the first place. We're about to move on to our headquarters phase. I've got 8 resources. I've actually now got 12 resources, 7 cards in hand, relative to Brian's 7 resources and 4 cards. I ended up drawing a second copy of Primal Howl and 1 Sanctioned Psyker. Brian's headquarters is now getting fairly full, with his Daring Assault Squad, with his Viorla Marksmen, and our new 5th final planet is going to be Barless. Here's another small mistake at this point in the video. I believe I play that Blackmane Sentinel, it eats up 2 of my resources, and I fail to realize that it's actually Brian's turn to take a deployment. So I'm out those resources, he knows that I've got a Blackmane Sentinel coming, I invest another 2 resources in it, and he was able, of course, to act with the foresight in mind of me having played that. So at this moment, I guess I've wasted 3 resources in this video and that eager recruits, but it's definitely something for me to keep in mind. Octagon's automated resource reduction functionality there. Brian plays out yet another daunting combat unit out at the first planet, which is the Borkon Recruits. They're 2/2 with 1 command icon. If a Warlord is present, they'll ultimately have an attack value of 4. I play out a Sanctioned Psyker at planet number 5 next to my Blackmane Sentinel, just because I know that if I relocate my Sentinel, I'm ultimately going to lose command at that planet, and I definitely want to reel in those 2 cards and prevent Brian from doing so if I can. I play a tactical squad at planet number 1 opposite his Borkon Recruits, so that if he deploys his Warlord there, I can hopefully affect as many units possible with an area effect volley. Although the initiative token is in Brian's hand at this point, I do have an Indomitable, and fortunately his Daring Assault Squad will be arriving exhausted. So at this point, I'm kind of at a bit of a loss for what to do. I'm just hoping to get in as many pot shots as possible at his units. He's got 1 of each kind of planet icon at the moment, so it's looking like as early as next turn he could potentially win the game, and at this point I've only got a single strong point icon, so the earliest I would be able to win is in 3 more planets. In setting our command dials, it's definitely looking good for Brian to go to planet 1. In regard to my options, knowing that I can have a Blackmane Sentinel back up Ragnar, I ultimately do pick planet number 3, and I'm hoping to route a unit, and I believe that this in and of itself is ultimately going to be a mistake as well, just because the unit I'll have wanted to route will be back in the HQ by the time I ultimately do route it. So this is kind of yet another example where I really should have probably sent my Warlord to planet 1. I was just probably overly afraid of the enemy's presence there. So really, in the interest of dealing out as much damage as possible, I probably should have pressed my luck. We do see Brian commit his Warlord and his forces to the first planet. The Borkon Recruits receives a copy of Shadowsun's Stealth Cadre, because of Shadowsun's deployment, and although Brian has this really frightening army sitting at the first planet and he has initiative, really all I've got is a sweeping command win here, so I pull in an enormous 5 cards and 5 resources. Brian is only going to pull in a single resource, so at the moment I've got 9 resources, 9 cards, even with having missed out on 3 earlier. Brian only has 6 resources and 2 cards, so he's definitely not going to be doing much shielding, which lends all the more credence to the notion that I really probably should have been a bit more ballsy with Ragnar and just gone for planet number 1. I could have gotten Primal Howls, I could have been triggering that ability, and it would have made an enormous bit of difference. I decide to play a copy of Indomitable to spare my tactical squad that hit of 6, and I trigger that area effect volley, which is going to be very helpful because Brian's not spending shields, and I deal out 4 damage among all of his units, so each of them ends up taking a single hit. Commander Shadowsun takes a swing at my tactical squad Cardenas, and I believe I allow that to go through. But let's see, I've certainly got a glut of different shield cards in my hand. I've got some very nasty surprises in the form of 2 different eager recruits, and I've got another oh-so-valuable tactical squad sitting in my hand. I do decide to let that damage go through. Once my opponent has attacked, I play out a copy of Eager Recruit, in that I'm really wanting to try and take as much advantage as possible over the fact that all of his units are exhausted and he's got very few cards in hand. I attack his Daring Assault Squad that has a gun drones affixed to it for 2 with my Eager Recruit, and Brian is deciding whether or not he wants to or can shield. It's threatening killing that 6 resources and 2 cards he's thus far invested in the unit, and let me tell you, that is an extremely valuable eager recruit, in that I do manage to kill off his Daring Assault Squad. It's now Brian's opportunity to respond with an action should he have one, and this is another something that kind of took me by surprise, because he has scarcely few allied units or cards in his deck. He plays out a copy of Eager Recruit of his own and attacks my tactical squad. So he takes a swing with that. He's now down to a single card in hand and 5 resources. I've got a plethora of shield cards in my hand, but I allow my tactical squad to die, knowing that during combat, my opponent has initiative, and therefore he's quite handily going to be able to absolutely crush that tactical squad for his swinging 6 Borkon recruits. And that is going to bring us to the end of combat. All of our units are going to ready in just a moment. I've only got my Eager Recruit left, and rather than simply let it be obliterated by that Borkon Recruits or anything else, I do opt to retreat, and that means another First Planet battle is going to be won by Brian. He nets another one of each planet icon, and at this point it's looking very, very favorable for him to win as early as the next planet. Any victory anywhere, and he's actually going to be the victor. His headquarters is now very full, and I realize my terrible mistake of having sent Ragnar to Farron, just because, as you can abundantly see, there is absolutely nowhere on the board for me to route any units. If I'd have sent Ragnar to the first planet, he could have dealt damage. I could have Primal Howled. I could have brought in that Blackmane Sentinel. I could have done those Eager Recruits. I could have done a whole host of nasty different things. During our headquarters phase, I do ultimately pull 2 drop pods. I've now got a grand total of 11 resources in hand, and Brian continues to have 9 resources and a very paltry 3 cards. So at this point, I've got an absolute command dominating presence, but I definitely have not leveraged the firepower I've had at my disposal to the extent required to deal with the army he's brought to bear. I lay out my tactical squad opposite my rogue trader, and I'm now kind of sitting my units nicely here at planet number 1. He puts out a copy of Fire Warrior Elite at the first planet, and at the present moment I'm very much trying to determine where he's going to go. The obvious answer is that he would be going to the first planet. Seeing as how I've played out my tactical squad there, I felt as though that was a significant enough deterrent that it would probably prevent him from going to that planet himself. So I'm going to kind of hedge my bets and count on the notion that he would, for some reason, commit his warlord to planet number 2, just so that during the following game round, all of his units would be ready and available to just absolutely massacre me. I play out a copy of Void Pirate at the 4th planet, which is our last planet here, not because I'm afraid of losing command, he's passed at this point, but simply because card draw is going to be much more valuable than resources. Whether or not I can count on triggering a Primal Howl or not, I've got 2 Drop Pod Assaults, I've got an Eager Recruit in my hand, and I'd very much like additional combat tricks, if at all possible. I could still potentially get another Drop Pod Assault. I believe I've seen all of my Eager Recruits at this point. In fact, I have, but I definitely would not say no to Crushing Blow. I would not say no to Indomitable, so definitely would be welcome there. He plays out another attachment fixed to his Viorla Marksman. I missed actually what it is, but at the present moment, things are looking like a potentially crushing win for him, depending on where exactly he deploys his forces. That Fire Warrior Elite sitting at the 1st planet is going to be tremendously problematic because it can absorb any attacks for me. I do ultimately opt to send my Warlord to Planet 2 so that I can set up my Eager Recruit for the following round, and because I figured he was going to play it safe and avoid my tactical squad, but I probably should have just not taken that risk because of how many combat tricks I had. I figured that wherever he'd send his forces, I had so many Drop Pod Assaults and Eager Recruit that I could have ultimately dealt with it, but this is definitely not what I was hoping to see, in that he sends his army to the very 1st planet here. So during a command, he is ultimately going to trigger Commander Shadowsun's reaction, I believe. And just kind of sizing things up, I'm figuring out whether or not I have any means at all of trying to scrape together a victory here. My Blackmane Sentinel is currently sitting at the 4th planet, doing me absolutely no good whatsoever. I was not fortunate enough to draw a copy of Blackmane's Hunt, which would have been absolutely clutch in this situation, and really could have potentially dramatically altered the outcome of the game, as we'll be seeing in a moment. We see a copy of Repulsor Impact Field adhere to the Fire Warrior Elite, which is going to serve to make things still more of a problem for me, just because not only is that effectively redirecting my attacks, but it's also dealing out 2 points of damage to each attacker that deals it non-lethal damage. Once again, I ultimately draw 5 cards and 3 resources. I don't really see that much great stuff. I was very unhappy to see a Tactical Squad Cardenas drawn, and this is yet another Tau event I was not expecting by any means. We see a copy of For the Tau Va played by my opponent, which allows him to ready each and every one of his units that happens to have an attachment after he has exhausted his Warlord. So that's all of his formidable combat units here and his Warlord itself, which sets him up frighteningly well for combat. Our ranged skirmish begins, and he takes a swing at my Tactical Squad Cardenas. I'll just note that during the command phase, the only resource and card that Brian ended up winning were the ones at the 1st planet. I allow my Tactical Squad Cardenas to be absolutely annihilated by, I believe, a 5-attack marksman. I wish I knew that 2nd attachment affixed to it. But at the moment, I've just got kind of a lot of dead cards in my hand. I've got a Blood Angels Veterans, Ragnar's War Camp. That's not really doing me too much good. The initiative for combat was, of course, in my opponent's hand. He's got plenty of attacking units. He swings against my Rogue Trader for 6, which in hindsight he probably should have saved, just because, seeing as how he's about to win the game, you would expect combat tricks from a Space Marine player with 11 cards and 9 resources in hand. I do play one of my Drop Pod Assaults. Fortunately, Brian only has 4 resources and 1 card. I see that my options are Honored Librarian and Blood Angels Veteran. veterans, but which am I ultimately going to pick? My primary concern is that repulsor impact field, and that deters me from picking that honored librarian, just because if it swings and doesn't kill, it itself will ultimately be destroyed, and I end up picking this Blood Angels Veterans just because at the very least it'll survive one proc of that repulsor impact field. And once again, pretty salty about seeing that Blackmane's Hunt. I'm a little careless with how I do the order of putting these cards on the bottom of my deck, but regardless, that's what I've done. It is now my turn to attack during combat. Once again, my Warlord sitting there having done woefully little during this game apart from winning me command, dealing a little bit of damage out that was ultimately healed away. I make a joke over Skype with Brian that I know exactly what he's going to do. I try to kill off his marksman, which I believe only has 3 hit points remaining, and he redirects it, of course, to his Fire Warrior Elite. He shields with his only remaining card in hand, a Repulsor Impact Field, so he takes 1 point of damage. The active Repulsor Impact Field triggers, and my exhausted Blood Angels Veterans takes 2 points of damage. Commander Shadowsun swings at me for 2 because of the presence of that Command Link drone, and I discard a copy of Primal Howl that I was never able to use in order to trigger that. I've got a glut of resources despite missing my 3 earlier in the game, 2 of which I spend for a second drop pod. And let's see what I get in the top 6 cards. There's a copy of Crushing Blow and Indomitable that I'd have loved to have drawn, but unfortunately I was not so lucky to come across those earlier. There are a couple different instances in this video where a copy of Crushing Blow in particular would have saved me an enormous bit of headache, and there are 2 copies in this deck. I would have liked to see something better than a Blackmane Sentinel, but it definitely beats nothing, and having a copy of that in play, I now take an opportunity to attack his Viorla Marksman, redirected, of course, to the Fire Warrior Elite. It now has 3 points of damage, and since I have a just surplus of shield cards in my hand, I get rid of a promotion in my hand. I could have just as easily used a 2 shield card, but in trying to maximize the value of my shielding, everything he's got is going to annihilate my units, so I might as well preserve it with just 1 hit point as opposed to something like that. We see the Command Link drone shift to the Fire Warrior Elite, and it attacks for 2 against my Blood Angels Veterans. I gladly discard a copy of Iron Halo in order to save its life, and that is going to bring us to the end of the first combat round. Unless I do what I just did and play an Eager Recruit. So at the moment, I'm trying to figure out what target I want to pick. Do I want to pick the Fire Warrior Elite or that Viorla Marksman? I do ultimately settle on the Elite, seeing as how it's only got 2 hit points left. Brian has no cards in hand to shield, and of course, as soon as I kill it, he's going to lose that Repulsor Impact Field without it managing to trigger. So the Command Link drone is gone, and that's kind of how that breaks down. I suppose Brian could have potentially used an action to shift away the Command Link drone, but it probably wouldn't have made too much of a difference, just seeing how much damage is out there sitting on my units. Now we come to the very end of that combat round, all of our units ready, and Brian, owing to the presence of his Warlord, does happen to have the initiative. There's no more ranged skirmish to be done, but he's still got his 6 attack Borkon recruits, he's got his Warlord with only a single point of damage, he's got that Eager Recruits, and things are looking very wounded on my side of the battlefield. All of these command units I have in play aren't doing me anything at all at the moment. We see the Blood Angels Veterans destroyed by his copy of Viorla Marksman. It attacks for 3, and I've only got 1 hit point remaining. but now I have an opportunity to attack. I'm trying to figure out what would be the best idea for my Blackmane Sentinel. He's got the Borkon recruits with 3 remaining hit points, and of course I'm 1 damage shy, so this is another opportunity where Crushing Blow would have been fantastic. I do decide to take a swing at the Borkon recruits, and they're sitting at 1 remaining hit point. And now it is his turn. So what is he going to do? He's got his 6 attack value attacker sitting there waiting. And at this point, it's looking very, very grim for me indeed. The eager recruit ends up getting destroyed, and at this point, all of my units are exhausted. So in all seriousness, the battle is basically lost. The first planet is the planet where we're fighting at. I get attacked by his eager recruit, and just to be a pain in the ass, I discard a copy of Primal Howl. Of course, the initiative does rest with Brian, so at this point, it's just a matter of my delaying the inevitable. He's going to end this game with a mere 3 resources, a lot of damaged units, but he is going to eke out a victory. So Commander Shadowsun takes a swing at me, and once again, just being a curmudgeonly bastard, I discard a copy of Promotion, wanting to persevere as long as I can. So the combat round ends. Shockingly, Brian does not retreat, and at this point, he's got the initiative. He's got a unit that's attacking for 6. He'd probably be very confused were I not talking to him on Skype at the moment, and ultimately my Blackmane Sentinel is destroyed, and that means Brian is going to capture this planet. That gives him 3 material icons, and at this point, he is the victor. Well, now that our match has come to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching, and I very much hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded and commentated match. If you have any suggestions for how I could improve my gameplay, or perhaps advice regarding things I could have done differently, I encourage you to comment. And remember that for as many videos as I post to this channel, my actual number of personal games played remains dreadfully and shamefully low, so your constructive criticism is therefore both welcome and appreciated. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. Or, if you are already subscribed, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more eyes there are on these videos, the more potential new players we might together draw to this game, and as a result, serve only to ever expand our Conquest community. Please feel free to contact me directly or keep in touch through Twitter or Facebook, and of course, I'd be both honored and humbled were you to visit my Patreon, because your encouragement and support, quite frankly, helps keep this channel alive. But in any case, thank you once again for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.